What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about some of the best $400 to $500 smartphones. I guess this is part one. We'll make a part two as well too, because there's a lot of phones that fall in this category. All right, so one of my favorites is the Galaxy Note 20 Ultra. This is still an awesome phone, and this phone is around $500 right now. So when I got it, it was around like $650 something. So it got a nice price drop. Also, by the end of this year, I can see this phone easily around $450. As we get closer to the new Galaxy phone. So this phone is, slowly but surely coming down in price here. I think it still has a really great design on here. It's got a stainless steel frame, a glass back on here. It's IP68 dust and water resistant. You have the built-in stylus as well too. It's still very accurate. This phone also has a really massive display at 6.9 inches. It's a dynamic AMOLED display at 120 Hz. It's HDR10 plus, but the 120 Hz is only at 1080p. So remember that. So it's a really nice display. It's got a high PPI of 496. It's really, really nice, very sharp, and like I said, massive display. So if you hate big phones, you're not gonna like this phone. Yeah, I just really like the display as far as the brightness, the color. 120 hertz is super smooth on here as well too. Overall, just a fantastic Samsung display. We do have on here the Snapdragon 865 chip on here, Adreno 650. I dropped the full gaming test for you guys, so if you guys want to see how this phone performs, check that out. Basically, it's still a beast with performance. It's still be able to play games at high settings, with little to no lag pretty much. This phone will get Android 13 as well too, which is something that we will be watching out for. This phone also has SD card support, so it's one of the last notes with SD card support. You have an option of 128 or 256 gigs with 12 gigs of RAM, or they do have one with 8 gigs of RAM, but majority of them, I believe, they have 12 gigs of RAM that you would buy. So stereo speakers on here sound great, actually better than the S22 Ultra. No headphone jack on here. NFC is on board. Under the display, fingerprint sensor is here, and all of the little bells and whistles like IP rating, Samsung desktop support is on here. Basically, all the stuff that you would find in the new Galaxy phones. And one of the awesome things about this phone is the camera setup is still really great on here. So it's a 108 megapixel standard, a 12 megapixel periscope telephoto that does 5x optical, and it does a 50 times hybrid zoom with 12 megapixel ultra wide. It can shoot in 8K 24, and then you do have a 10 megapixel selfie cam that shoots in 4K 60. I think the photos still look really great on here as well too. So I really had no issues with image quality. I think you get some really highly detailed shots. Great zoom capability on here still. The cameras are still great on this phone. You also have a 4,500 milliamp battery with 25 watt charging with wireless and reverse wireless charging. Battery life on here, you can pretty much get 6 hours of screen on time, so the battery life is still pretty good on this phone. Next is the Poco F3, which you can actually find for slightly under 400 bucks. I absolutely love this phone for this price point. So this one has also a glass back and a really nice design. It's got a plastic frame. It's IP53 dust and splash proof as well. Now this phone has a pretty awesome display. It's a 120 Hz AMOLED display, HDR10 plus, at 6.67 inches at 1300 nits peak brightness, and it's 1080p 395 for the PPI. Overall, it's a very nice panel, completely flat. Like I said, it gets really bright. It's got the punch hole in the middle. Absolutely love this display. Just looks really, really nice. Very silky smooth with the 120 hertz on here. Now this phone does have the Android 11. I think I just got the Android 12 update with the MIUI skin on here as well too. And basically, you're not going to get that flagship experience like, let's say for instance, like the Note. You will have like kind of like the bloatware stuff that you have to kind of uninstall. I think that was the only thing I didn't like about the software experience, and sometimes I would have like these little minor glitches, but overall MIUI is really not as bad as people say. But it is the Snapdragon 870 on here in the Adreno 650, which is definitely the highlight of this phone. This phone is crazy fast, especially for this price point. The benchmarks were just really nice on here. Gaming performance was pretty awesome on here. There was really nothing that this phone couldn't play. It just bounces in and out of applications, effortlessly. So I was really impressed with just how speedy the phone is here. So you do have no SD card support, 128 gigs of internal storage, and 8 gigs of RAM. You also have stereo speakers, which honestly they just sounded okay. Not the best that I've heard, but definitely I'm glad they're here. Now, one thing that this phone has is the infrared port, which a lot of people don't care about. I absolutely love the infrared port. I use this phone to control all the TVs in my house. Absolutely love it. It's a killer feature to have. The fingerprint sensor is physical. It's side mounted. It's also a really nice addition to this phone as well too. You also can use face unlock if you want. This phone also has actually very good cameras. It's a 48 megapixel standard, an 8 megapixel ultra wide, then a 5 megapixel macro with 4K 30 video, and then you have a 20 megapixel selfie that shoots in 1080p 60. Image quality was actually pretty good. So in good lighting, it takes fantastic photos, but I was even more impressed with just your medium to like average lighting. It actually still takes some very nice detailed shots on here, so I was pretty impressed with the image quality that this phone was able to put out. Also, the battery life is actually pretty good on here as well too. It's a 4,520 milliamp battery with 33-watt charging on here. This phone does lack wireless charging because it is technically a mid-ranger, but yeah, the battery life is pretty good, and it also charges somewhat decently fast as well too. So I was really impressed with that. Definitely all day battery life with this phone. I think this is a really great phone. Now next is the Pixel 6a. So this is a very interesting phone because it comes in at around $450 here. And it's an interesting mid-ranger. I actually really like this phone. I think the only thing that I wasn't happy with was the lack of like a 90 hertz display or anything like that. But if you can get over that, I think this phone has a lot to offer. I really like the design on here. It's an aluminum frame. It's got a plastic back on here. It overall feels pretty solid in the hand. It's IP67 dust and water resistant. The display is actually not that bad. It's a 6.1 inch OLED HDR display. Like I said, I wish it was HDR plus, but it is 1080p 429 for the PPI. And I do like the size of this phone at 6.1 inches. It's one of the smaller phones, so it's very easy to one hand. So the highlight with this phone is actually the Android 12 and the stock, Android experience. This phone will get Android 13. I think it already got it, and it's just a very smooth experience as far as the software experience goes. Also, this phone has a Google Tensor chip, which is very fast. You get some great benchmark scores on here. I did a gaming test, and it did a fantastic job with gaming on this phone as well too. So I was pretty impressed with just general performance. Things launching, things not lagging and stuttering and stuff like that. I was pretty impressed with performance on here. You also have 128 gigs of internal storage and 6 gigs of RAM. No SD card support. The stereo speakers are actually definitely above average on here. Really nice quality, great bass on here as well too. You also have NFC on here as well too. The under the display fingerprint sensor, it does work. I wish this phone had face unlock, but it does work. I haven't had any like actual issues with that. It's just not the fastest. Now the highlight with this phone is the cameras on here. I still think these are top-notch cameras, especially for this price point. So it's got a 12.2 megapixel standard and a 12 megapixel ultra wide. It shoots in 4K 60 with an 8 megapixel selfie cam that shoots in 1080p 30. I was pretty impressed with image quality. I put this phone against even some more expensive phones like the 13 Pro, my Poco F3. I put it against that. I was just taking photos and just to see. And guys, this phone still takes fantastic photos. I mean, great image quality on here. Great dynamic range. The Google processing is just spot on here. I just really like the way Google does their image processing on here. It takes pretty good photos in lower light conditions as well too. So I think if you want a really solid camera, this is definitely one of those cameras where I think for the price point you're getting almost pretty much flagship quality photos still. Alright, so the battery life on here is a 4,410 milliamp battery, only 18-watt charging, which is kind of slow, and there's no wireless charging. So as far as the battery situation, this phone, I was able to get around 6 hours of screen on time, so it does a pretty good job with battery. So overall, I have no issues with the Pixel 6a besides like I wanted a high refresh rate. I think cameras are phenomenal and the chip is pretty powerful. Alright guys, next is the LG V60. So this is another awesome phone and the price has come down so much. You can pick this up for like 250 bucks, and also since it's so cheap, I will go ahead and buy the dual screen case for another $100. You can get them on eBay, and then boom, that's still under 400 bucks, and you got yourself a very powerful phone here. So this one has an aluminum frame. It's got a glass back. It's IP68 dust and water resistant as well too. and it's just a tank of a design, first off. And then it's got a pretty big 6.8-inch display. It's POLED HDR10 Plus at 1080p 395 for the PPI. So overall, it's a big display. It's very nice. It's bright enough for me. And yeah, I have no issues with the display on here. So this phone did get the Android 12 update, and it's looking like this phone will get the Android 13 update as well too, which is really exciting. You do have the Snapdragon 865 chip on here and the Adreno 650 on here as well too. So this is still a very powerful phone. Like I said, if you go ahead and get that dual screen case, you can turn this into a multitasking beast as far as like gaming, as far as like basically doing whatever you want. It is a very powerful multitasking phone. You also have micro SD card support on here, 128 gigs of internal storage, 8 gigs of RAM on the base model. You also have excellent sounding stereo speakers on here, and one of the highlights with this phone is the quad DAC. So this does have a headphone jack with a quad DAC, and it is very high quality audio experience on here, not just with the headphone jack, but the speakers, like I said, and also the vibration motor on here is pretty strong as well too. So overall, it's a really great phone for audio. NFC is on this phone as well too, and this phone does have under the display fingerprint sensor that works. It's not the fastest, but I've never had any real issues with it. So this phone also has a 64 megapixel standard, a 13 megapixel ultra wide with a 0.3 depth sensor, and it shoots in 8K 30. You also have 10 megapixel selfie that shoots in 4K 30. Image quality is still very good. It's very competitive even with the best phones on the market right now. So I think detail looks good, really natural colors and stuff like that. The ultra wide is pretty nice as well too. And like I said, you get that 8K video as well too, which is really awesome as well. So I had zero issues with the image quality. You can see for yourself, still takes great photos. Also, this is one of my favorite phones as far as battery life. 5,000 milliamp battery, excellent standby time on this phone. You also have wireless charging on here as well too, and this is a phone that can easily do a day and a half of battery life pretty easy. So this is an excellent phone overall. All right, last is going to be the Galaxy S21. So this is a pretty fantastic phone because this phone came down in prices around like 400 bucks. Absolutely love this phone when I first got it. A lot of people didn't like the plastic back, but over time this phone has really grown on me, and I think the price is just right on this phone at this point. So it still has a premium feel to me. It's still got an aluminum frame on here. It's still IP68 dust and water resistant, and honestly the plastic back, if you like drop phones a lot and crack them and stuff like that, this is really hard. Like, you can't crack obviously plastic as easy as glass. All right, so this phone does have a pretty compact design, kinda. It's a 6.2 inch display. It's dynamic AMOLED, 120 Hz, HDR10 Plus at 1300 nits peak brightness. It is 1080p 421 for the PPI here, and it was a fantastic display here. It's a completely flat, very slim bezels on here, punch hole, silky smooth, 120 hertz. The experience of watching content is just fantastic on here. Of course, this phone is going to get many updates for years to come. It actually has the Snapdragon 888 processor and the Adreno 660. Still a beast when it comes to performance, bouncing in and out of applications. Gaming performance is you'll still be able to play at high settings. This phone, it can get a little bit warm long periods of gaming, so that's one thing that I noticed though. 128 gigs of internal storage, 8 gigs of RAM, no SD card support. Excellent sounding stereo speakers, great bass quality on here. NFC is on here. The fingerprint scanner super fast on here. Basically all your bells and whistles like Samsung desktop support and all the software stuff is on here as well too. I think the cameras are still fantastic on this phone as well too. A 12 megapixel standard with a 64 megapixel telephoto lens. It also has 3x hybrid zoom with a 12 megapixel ultra wide, and it shoots in 8K 24 with a 10 megapixel selfie cam that shoots in 4K 60. Image quality is still top notch on here. It's still flagship quality photos on here, so don't let a year passing by for you. This is still a really great camera for taking photos. So you do have a 4,000 milliamp battery on here with wireless charging and reverse wireless charging. This phone was able to squeeze around like 6 hours of screen on time, so even though the battery is kind of smaller, it's still able to get you pretty much all day battery life. So this wasn't a phone that died on me in a day. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you guys in the next one.